Dollar. Dirt and money, no soul. Had to go and get it, ain't no time to kick it. Got a stack of flip for my foes. Dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar. Let me watch out for my partners. Keep my money long, get my team strong. Let me run away from my problems.
Yep, what's good, original crew, man? We're back today. Hey, say, man, we got a new ballin'. They ate the forbidden meat. Top 3 strange, but yet true. The forbidden meat. I wonder what this would be about. Now, I do know I would never do that. What is it, the octopus or is the
octopus?
What's the other one you can't do? That's poisonous. I can't remember. But I do know the octopus is the one with the suction cups can get stuck to you if you don't chew it all the way.
Don't chew it good enough. Yeah.
But it's the other one that's poisonous. And I can't think of that one. The fish that's poisonous, if they'll cook it right. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And I know it's a delicacy and all this stuff, but hey.
You don't know what you're doing then.
Green's a delicacy in the South, and I don't eat that.
You crazy.
I don't eat a lot of things that's a Southern delicacy. Pig feet, She really don't eat a lot of stuff that's delicacy. I don't eat beans.
Yeah, I do. I eat more than you.
I don't eat no baked beans, no black eyed peas, none of that. Neck bone, none of that.
I don't eat black eyed peas.
That's southern meals.
And I don't eat pig feet either. I don't eat nothing pork.
Collard green, mustard green, turnip green. Nope.
I love all that.
Never.
Little neck bone. I love me some neck bone. Anyway, let's go.
Hey, make sure y'all check out the links in the description box.
Down below.
You already know where to go. If you want the first part, you got to do it. Check out down below. Also, if you enjoyed today's visuals,
like it in with a thumbs up.
Hey, man. Say, man, let's go. Let's see what it's about. Yo.
Today, I'm going to tell 3 strange but true stories. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do, and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please steal the like button's phone and completely rearrange the location of all their apps. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads.
Something I want to do.
Okay, let's get into today's stories. On the afternoon of September 27th, 1956, a 13-year-old boy named Neary Morgan was walking with his 2 younger brothers through a desert in South Australia called Maralinga. Neary and his brothers were members of an isolated Aboriginal tribe called the Martu, and they were out right now to hunt kangaroos for their family. So Neary had a spear, and his 2 younger brothers had a club, and they also had a boomerang. And for a while, they had been tracking this particular group of kangaroos. But every time they slowed down and, the brothers got ready to strike, the kangaroos would take off. And it was very frustrating. But eventually, as they were walking, this group of kangaroos stopped at a watering hole, which was just a few dozen yards away from them. And so at that point, the brothers knew this was their chance. These kangaroos were going to stay here long enough that they could strike. And so Neary signaled to his brothers that it was time to move. And so they got down in the brush and began advancing on the kangaroos. But after only taking a few steps, they heard this loud rumbling sound off in the distance. And as they looked to see what was going on, the sky suddenly was illuminated impossibly bright to the point where Neary is shielding his eyes to just see what's going on here. And as he was doing this extremely hot gust of wind came blasting through and literally knocked the brothers onto the ground, totally disorienting them. And then from the ground, at some point, Neary kind of turns his head and he happens to look in the direction of the watering hole where the kangaroos were. And then he sees them literally floating in the air, coming right over to him and then dropping on the ground. And then a moment later, it was like everything just went back to normal. The sky went back to a normal color. There was no more rumbling. There was no more wind. Except now, you have all these kangaroos just dead right in front of Neary and his brothers. Now, of course, Neary and his brothers had a lot to process here. I mean, they really had no idea what had happened. But they're looking at this bounty right in front of them, all these kangaroos, and they're thinking, what's just happened here was a gift from God. Clearly, what we just experienced was literally God lifting these kangaroos up, ending their lives and putting them at our feet. This was a gift. And so eventually, Neri and his brothers, after kind of standing up and dusting themselves off, began lifting up these kangaroos and carrying as many as they could back to their tribe. And then that night, the tribe had this big celebration honoring this gift they had been given from God, and they had this big feast and they ate all this kangaroo meat. I mean, it was incredible. But then the next day, when the tribe woke up, everybody who had eaten any of that kangaroo was violently sick. Vomiting, rashes all over their body, aches, pain. I mean, people were really sick. And over the next few days, some people did recover, but a lot of others did not. And soon, people from this tribe began dying. And so naturally, Neri and the other members of the tribe did make the connection that very likely whatever was happening here, the sickness, was tied to consuming that kangaroo meat. And then other members of the tribe who didn't necessarily subscribe to the idea that, this had been a gift from God, just said clearly the meat was poisoned. But they didn't know if that was intentional, if somebody had done that, or if it was just kind of a byproduct of something else. But poison, that's what was doing this. But for Neri and his tribe, this whole event remained a mystery until 1967, so 11 years later, when Neri was 24 years old. That's when representatives of the British government came out to southern Australia, near where the Martu tribe lived, and began trying to clean up the mess that they had made. It would turn out all those dead kangaroos that got kind of dumped out of the sky right in front of Neri and his brothers were not the result of, God giving them a gift. Instead, the reason that happened was because of a big scientific experiment that was conducted in Maralinga in total secrecy. The British government was testing nuclear bombs. Neri and his brothers had been a few kilometers away from a detonation site. And where they were positioned was basically exactly in the right spot to where they would feel the effects of the explosion. They would hear it. They would see this huge lighting up of the sky. They would feel the shockwave, but they were just far enough away from the detonation site that the shockwave and the blast and all that did not kill them. It knocked them to the ground and made them totally disoriented and confused. And I'm sure it hurt a great deal, but it didn't kill them. However, those kangaroos they had been stalking were technically closer to the detonation site. They were also smaller and so were more susceptible to an explosion being affected by it. And so they were just close enough that when that shockwave passed through, it lifted up and obliterated the kangaroos and threw them right in front of Neri. They were like right at that perfect separation point. Neri and brothers just barely safe, kangaroos just barely in the lethal zone. And so keep in mind that Neri and his brothers did not know things like nuclear bombs existed. They're very isolated. They're completely cut off from sort of modern society. And so even though they saw a lot of indications that this was a bomb,
crazy, bro.
They didn't really interpret it that way. Instead, they interpreted this as, God has bestowed upon me this bounty. Like this is a gift from God. But in reality, it was just this explosion, and the meat, the kangaroo meat, was not only devastated from the blast, but it was also littered with radiation from the blast. And so the members of the tribe who ate the kangaroo meat immediately got radiation sickness and began to die. An unknown number of people died from these nuclear bomb tests. And it would take 11 years before the British government would come in and begin cleaning up the nuclear waste. The Australian government ultimately paid $13.5 million in compensation to Aboriginal tribes that were affected by these tests. As for Neri, he survived, and today he's actually in his 80s, and he continues to tell his story to younger generations.
Ooh, that's crazy. Look good though, don't it?
He does look good.
For somebody that went through some stuff like that,
Very.
Could have happened in what,
1956. That's crazy.
Well, he was born
13.
in the 40s. Yeah.
That's sad.
Yeah, it's a tragic situation to have to, you know what I'm
He was just
saying?
out trying to gather food.
And I wonder did they even were familiar with that it's a possibility of lives or humans being in that area. Also, you got to think about the time period. They probably don't know where everybody, you know what I'm saying, are located. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
See, they knew. See, they knew. They knew what they were doing. Man, luckily, I will say at the end of the day, luckily they were blessed to be able to survive through it. And then I'm talking about like even the blast itself, and they wasn't, you know what I'm saying. Unfortunately, so many people died from eating the meat,
Yeah.
but the blast itself could have wiped all of them out, and they was able to survive from even the blast, you know,
Yeah.
because it was just like.
Yeah. I hear what you're saying.
She's, I hear you. It's still
It's just,
and that money didn't amount to nothing, bro. Like.
yeah, true.
It doesn't bring back those lives that were unfortunately lost from something that y'all are testing and experimenting with that they probably have
Without
absolutely
taking
no
everything
idea.
into account.
Yeah.
Continues to tell his story to younger generations. At 4 p.m. on Saturday, October 26, 2019, a 56-year-old woman named Pamela Krymeyer was hanging out in her son's backyard in Knoxville, Iowa. She was there with her son and his wife, who was expecting a child, along with some other relatives. And they were there that day in the backyard to have a gender reveal party. And Pamela could not have been more excited. So during the week, Pamela worked full-time as an assistant at a U.S. Army base nearby. But to her, that was just a job. That was not like her identity. Where Pamela really put all her energy was her family. I mean, she really identified not as somebody who worked at that army base, but rather as a mom and a wife and a grandmother. And she was so excited to find out if her new grandchild was going to be a boy or a girl. And so after a little while, Pamela's son finally signaled to the group that it was time to get started. And so Pamela and the other relatives got really excited and they backed up towards the fence on the side of the yard. And Pamela pulled out her phone to film this because she wanted to make sure she saved this moment for future generations. I mean, this was a pivotal moment in her family's history. And so all excited, Pamela's filming, and Pamela's son and his pregnant wife walked towards the middle of the yard where there was this device that was set up that was basically going to reveal whether it was a boy or a girl. Blue for boy and pink for girl. There was going to be some dust kind of shot out into the air. And so Pamela's son turns to the crowd and says, okay, you guys ready? And Pamela's really excited. She gives a thumbs up and she's filming. And then Pamela's son turns away from the crowd and he kind of leans over this device. He does something to it. And then he and his wife backed up along the fence line with the other relatives. And everybody watched and filmed, waiting to see if this device was going to spit out blue or pink. But before anybody could see any color, there was this deafening booming sound. And then for Pamela, everything went black. A split second later, the backyard was absolute chaos as people screamed and called out to call 911. It would turn out the device in the middle of the backyard that was going to be used to reveal whether the baby was a boy or a girl was a homemade device. Basically, it was like the cylinder that Pamela and her son and family had made that basically would fire off either pink or blue powder. Except the tube that the powder sat inside of was metal, and then what they were using to basically shoot the powder out was gunpowder. So they basically packed gunpowder into a metal tube, sealed it off, and then attached a fuse to the gunpowder. And so when Pamela's son went and lit the fuse, as he leaned over and lit the fuse and said, okay, we're gonna see what it spits out, he had lit, effectively, a pipe bomb. And then when the fuse ignited the gunpowder, the metal tubing exploded and sent shards of metal up to 400 feet away. And one particular piece of metal shard went right at Pamela and into her head. When first responders showed up in the backyard, they saw a scene that was absolute chaos. Holes in the fence, holes in the house, metal everywhere, and Pamela lying up against the fence on the ground, dead. Amazingly, despite the shrapnel being blasted out all over the neighborhood and in close proximity to other people in the backyard, Pamela was the only fatality. And because it was ultimately ruled an accident, no one faced criminal charges.
Yeah.
Damn, bro.
That's
When he started explaining, I said, "Oh, bro, that it wasn't." I get the idea and the gist that what they were hoping for was more like a firecracker, where it's
just
like that.
not
But they probably
thinking
put
it.
too much where it said it went. You know what I'm saying?
That is so heartbreaking and devastating. Like y'all just said, a gender reveal, just a casual day at a gender reveal,
That's insane.
and your mom is.
I wonder, was that the photo from the gender reveal?
Probably not. Yeah, probably not.
Not a real photo from
Yeah.
the gender reveal. Okay.
Yeah.
So it wasn't. That's, man. You know how
That is
like
so
devastating
sad.
that is.
So sad. Rest
You know
in
he
peace to
probably.
Pamela.
You know he probably walking around with guilt. You know what I'm saying from that? Cause that happened 2019. So the child was 5, about 5 now.
I pray not.
Oh. I about to say one of them COVID babies. You know what
But
I'm
no,
saying?
I pray not though. Like
Well, pray
was a
not what?
freak. that he's not walking around with guilt. It
He,
was a
he
freak
probably
accident.
does though.
I just pray he does it. Like you can't carry that, but
Can't carry that burden on you like
Yeah.
that, yeah. Which is
it
true.
was a freak accident.
Yeah. Damn, that's devastating though.
Yeah.
On the morning of October 30th, 2014, a 54-year-old Russian pilot named Sergei Galitsky, along with his translator, walked into the Flight Safety International building in Wichita, Kansas. This building was inside of the Wichita National Airport, and it was basically just a big training facility for pilots. Once inside, Sergei walked up to the front desk and explained to the clerk in Russian that he was here that day to try to get a certification for a particular type of Cessna plane. His translator then repeated what he said in English to the clerk, at which point the clerk nodded and said they would go back and get Sergei's instructor. A few moments later, the clerk returned, now with a 78-year-old man named Jay Ferguson, who was the instructor. Jay introduced himself to Sergei and the translator, they all shook hands, and then Jay led the two deeper into the building. And as soon as they were inside, Sergei and the translator saw all this crazy high-tech training equipment basically everywhere they looked. Eventually, Jay came to a stop in front of this big, white, circular pod that was up on top of this electronic base. Now, to the untrained eye, this might look like a futuristic amusement park ride, but to Sergei, he knew what this was. This was a flight simulator. So Sergei had been a pilot for over 30 years. He had loads of experience flying. He had flown big commercial aircraft and helicopters. But today, he was learning how to fly a sort of mid-tier plane, this little Cessna plane. And before he'd be allowed, even with all this experience, to actually go out and fly this thing, he had to do a couple of simulated flights inside of the simulator to kind of run through the motions, get some experience before actually going out and doing it. And so Jay reached out and opened up the door to this pod and gestured for Sergei and the translator to go inside. And so they did. Sergei went in, and he saw right away that the inside was an exact replica of the inside of a Cessna, like down to every little detail. It looked exactly the same. Even out the windows, it appeared like they actually were situated on a real airport runway. And so Sergei sat down in the pilot's seat, Jay took a seat next to him, and the translator took a seat behind both of them. Once they were situated, Jay and Sergei went through the mandatory pre-flight safety checks, something you would do on any flight. You just make sure the plane is in good working order, that your communications are good. Same thing they would do for a real flight, they're doing for this simulator. And then once they were done, Jay pressed a button, which turned on the engine of this flight simulator. And it actually felt like it really turned on a real engine, like the pod began to rumble, like this was a real plane. Then, once Jay gave Sergei the green light, Sergei released the brakes, at which point it very much appeared like the plane began to roll forward. And as it did, Sergei grabbed the yoke, which is like the steering wheel, and he began to turn the plane, this simulated plane, towards the runway. And it was amazing how lifelike this whole thing felt. The pod actually would move and kind of keep up with all the movements that Sergei was initiating in this simulation. It really felt like they were in an actual plane. And then, once Sergei had positioned the plane on the runway, he hit the gas, and the pod throttled back as the plane rocketed down the runway, and before long, they took off and they were up into the sky. Once flying in the sky, Sergei kind of circled around the digital airspace for a while, kind of feeling out the controls, and he quickly found the Cessna was a little bit more sensitive than the other aircrafts he had flown before. So it took some time to kind of get his bearings, and then once he was feeling pretty comfortable, and he relayed as much to Jay, Jay began relaying directions and feedback to Sergei through the translator, just basically testing Sergei's ability to fly this craft, because at the end of the day, this was a test. Sergei needed to prove he could do this in order to get his certification. After a little while, Sergei felt like he was doing a really good job and he had good control of the craft, And Jay as well felt like this had gone really well, and Sergey had effectively passed his test. And so a decision was made to go ahead and land this plane back on the runway. So Sergey circled around and he angled the plane right alongside the runway, and he came down and he was taking his time and everything was going exactly right. And then right as the wheels of this plane touched the runway, the instant that happened, there was this loud crashing sound, and then everything went black. At the same time this was happening, folks standing outside of the Flight Safety International building, they heard this loud crashing sound, and they looked in the direction, which is toward the Flight Safety building, and they saw there was this massive fire and black cloud of smoke coming up from the backside of the building. And so they called 911. And when first responders arrived on scene, they discovered evidence of a plane crash. It would turn out there was another pilot named Mark Goldstein who was flying that day out of Wichita National Airport. Except Mark was flying an actual plane. He was the only passenger inside of a 6-seat passenger plane. And pretty much as soon as he took off, he lost control and he crashed through the walls of the Flight Safety International building. Specifically, he struck the flight simulator where Jay, Sergey, and his translator were busy trying to land their digital flight. The plane crash, along with subsequent fiery explosion, claimed the lives of Mark, Jay, Sergey, and his translator.
What the fuck? You talking about a horrible coincidence type thing? What the? That doesn't even make sense, bro. You know what I mean?
I wonder, like, with the other ones, he probably said it, but I was, like, in another world. Like, with the plane that Mark was in, the one that was, like, actually crashed, like, the real plane, was, like, there any, like, defects? Like, what happened?
Oh, he didn't say.
Oh, he didn't say.
He didn't say. He said he once he took off, he lost control. That's
that's sad. Rest in peace to all of them.
That's insane, dog.
Yep.
Oh man, wow. Oh, hey, y'all spam us up, man. Let us know y'all thoughts. Just unbelievable. Let us know y'all thoughts about it for us in the comment section down below. But until next time, y'all know how it go, man. I do go by the name DJ New Kid. This is
Sierra Nicole.
We are.
Kid and
We out.
Ain't no time to kick it, gotta stack a flip for my foes. Dollar, 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 dollar. Please tell me you can hear me. Don't turn your back and don't neglect me. Just let me know if you need me. Dollar, 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 dollar.